Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Charmed. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, I'm going to be breaking it down by each one of the sisters, storyline this episode, which you also have to throw, obviously the through line for a lot of their stories is, man, they all have very different yet similar, complicated, well, they have the same through line of the situation, the allergy, making their relationships very complicated on every front. But first and foremost, let's start off with Mel's side of things. Obviously she's trying to date, she's, trying to make things work with Ruby, like this whole long, quote unquote, long distance relationship. And then you have Ruby having that friend. It's like, oh, Ruby Tuesday and everything. It's like, oh yeah, your muffin friend. And it's like, oh, like, yeah, nothing to be jealous about. We're just friends. Okay, she asked me out, but obviously I said no. But then Mel threw out something I thought was interesting. She was like, it's like, it was almost like she was implying, like, I get we can't have sex, but it was almost like she was saying, like, if you need to, like, satisfy, like, it, or I think in general she was more so saying, like, being with me is kind of difficult right now because that's a complication that, even, we kind of find out Maggie and Jordan kind of went through that, but also, Harry and, Macy are finding their way around that. So it wasn't more so like, hey, if you need to kind of get your rocks off, do your thing. Hey, like, I completely understand it. It's like more so being together with me right now isn't the best thing. So it's not such an obvious no. Like but it's like, no, Ruby's like, I want to be with you. But then also like everything with Abigail, which obviously she's back to rule in the demon world. It's about time we got back to like what's been up with her. We haven't seen anything for a couple episodes. So, for her to kind of pop back on a scene, and it turns out she's being attacked, and she turns to the one person she can turn to, Mel. Because I guess Mel's the most, like, because in her own way, Abigail does like Mel, and obviously people have even suggested, like, putting those two characters together. Because it's interesting, because, like, I was always under the impression that, and maybe there's still, I think there's room for both of them to kind of play this role, but, I thought, Maggie and Parker were the Phoebe and Cole of the situation, but if you made it more of that Mel and Abby thing, because people were already kind of shipping them together, but it's also because it's like Mel out of anybody dislikes Abby the most, because she obviously doesn't trust her the most, but it's also like that polar opposite seemed like why they can probably, there's a lot of similarities, and obviously there's a lot of differences between them, but it's like they do seem like character-wise they would gel well together, interestingly enough. But Abigail needs Mel's help. It's like, oh, I don't have anyone to turn to. And it's kind of like, Mel's kind of like, we got our own issues to deal with. I'm not really going to help you. But it's like, someone's trying to kill me, and I don't know who it is. I need your help. I'm the one that's helping you. Notice you haven't been attacked by any demons lately. All your mystery monsters and stuff like that, sure, but nothing to do with me. I'm keeping the peace. I'm holding up my end of the bargain. So help me, because you need me around. Because if someone ends up killing me, once again, it's going to be hunting season, because it's like, yeah, I've been a little cutthroat, but it's only towards demons. I haven't done anything towards the witches. So there. Even to the point, like, you could tell, like, Abby's, like, super flirting with Mel. Like, oh, I feel safer if you slept with me. She's like, don't push it. It's like, Mel's like, you're not going to get me. But it's like, which is so interesting, because obviously she had a real big thing for Harry, but I think there's some part of her that's like, honestly, Mel, like, we could work so well together, like, you being the powerful witch that you are, and me being the powerful demon, witch, that I am, I think it's her just because she likes to tease Mel, but I also think it's like, there is something there. I mean, let's not forget, she was there when Mel found out, I have to sacrifice myself to save not only my sisters, but also save all the magical creatures in the world, including the demons. So she was there for that. So they had a little bit of bond and kinship. Also, let's not forget who she saw Ruby there. So I was like, almost like, huh. I think Abigail also just has this tendency to go after what she can't have. So it's like Mel is unattainable to her. That just makes her want to have Mel more, I think. That potential. I don't know. I don't know if they would go down that route. It'd be a really interesting route. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's enough room for both Mel and Abigail's potential relationship to be very reflective of Phoebe and Cole, much like Parker and Maggie's relationship was. But regardless, Mel's there when she gets attacked, but like obviously doesn't see what causes it. So it's like, okay, you can stay here at the house. It's like, oh, well, what about your sisters? I'll deal with that. Ruby shows up, and it's like, Abby's like, oh, who's that, Mel? And it's like, oh, I guess you're busy. And it's like, well, I guess you're busy with Muffin Girl. It's like, really? Like, because Mel was like flipping through Instagram, was like, oh, really? Who waters their plant in their bikini? Like, she was getting super jealous. Understandably so, especially when, like, you feel like, but, you know, even but even Abby calls her out on it, saying, like, oh, you have a tendency to push people away because you have this insecurity that people are going to abandon you. Understandably so, considering, like, their father literally abandoned them, so it's like, of course it's going to give you some abandonment issues. Plus, like, your mom dying and finding out she has all these secrets and stuff like that, so it feels almost like you got abandoned in another way, too. Plus, you end up finding out your own father isn't actually your father. Well, your father is your father, so you find out, like, obviously your sister's father, what you believe that Maggie and you shared Ray as a father, but that's a whole thing. But it's more so like, yeah, you feel, you know, of course you're going to have some form of abandonment issues, but it's a thing of, I'd rather cut ties with people on some subconscious level rather than have them leave me and just be heartbroken. So, understandably so, it's, you know, we've all kind of felt like that and kind of done things like that, kind of self-sabotage our own relationships in certain regards. I definitely have. I can name a number of times I've actually done that, and kind of in a similar vein. But then, like, Mel kind of throws it back in Abigail's face about her handling this all on her own, which is like, yeah, it was, because even her calling Abby out, it's like, no, you did that on purpose. Like, what she was, whether she'll admit it or not, she was just doing that on her own. But like, Mel kind of threw it back at her, and it's like, all right, fine, you want to deal with your monster on your lonesome. And I thought it was so interesting because we saw Abigail terrified. She's never scared, because she's always, I think it's because this is one of the circumstances where it's like, she's fully out of control, out of, you know, and she usually has some form of control. This is something in someone she can't see or fight. So, like, obviously the fire, like, afterwards, I think Mel took pity on her because, like, Mel saw her in the corner like that, like, being, like, totally terrified. Saying, you never see Abigail like that. And even then, she's like, whoa, you're not going to stay with me? Like, it's like, whoa, you were, like, legitimately scared. Like, you always act so tough, but it's like, you know, you're vulnerable, too. Like, you can be vulnerable, but you never want people to see that because vulnerability, in her mind, is weakness, you know? So it was just interesting seeing that, but I love the reveal when because at first when you see the monster, I was like, oh, why is, because obviously, Abby's never seen it, and neither has Mel, so I was like, why is it that Maggie can? I was like, does it have something to do with her being an empath? But then we got a better look at it from far, as it kind of cleared up a little bit. I was like, wait, isn't that? And it turned out to be Abby's demon form. I'm like, she's been doing this to herself. She lost, I was like, I guess, like, the power was too much, and she ended up, like, I mean, we don't know how long the attacks have been going on. Like, what we saw at the beginning of the episode, well, beginning with her, yeah, that was at the beginning of the episode. I guess we don't know, like, how often the attacks were happening before then. Obviously, I mean, that scene we saw, well, I think she had said last night's attack was pretty vicious, so I guess, like, it had been happening, but she was just like, it became more and more frequent that she's like, I can't do anything about it, so I need to turn to someone who will help me, because she knows if she turned to any other demon, they'd most likely use it against her. You know, once again, she'd be showing weakness. So she knows that the Charmed Ones would never, as she says, Mel and the Charmed Ones would never betray her. They never have, so. In particular, Mel. So I just thought that was interesting. But we kind of find out a little bit more that basically when she was a little girl, her mom, trying to get rid of some of her demon tendencies, stripped her of her demon form. Which I brought that up too, is like, we've rarely seen demons in their demon form. Like, because even Parker's demon form was just like him turning into a smoke monster, but I guess that's technically what his demon form looks like. But it was interesting to know, like, oh, this is like one of the first, like, I think we've seen some, but, like, not to this extent. Like I said, it's just so interesting. But we've seen her full-blown demon form, and now she knows, like, oh, you've been subconsciously trying to kill yourself. But it's because her mom took away her demon form years ago, and, like, obviously she was recently able to reclaim it. Obviously, her sister as well, but her sister won't have nothing to do with her. I'm assuming, could be wrong, I'm assuming her sister might be human. Maybe. Or at the very least, a witch. Considering, like, well, because obviously Parker walks that line between, well, obviously they have different mothers, so he has a, he had the human side, whereas Abigail isn't half human, she's half witch, half demon. So that's probably why her sister wants to have nothing to do with her, because it's like, oh, your demon side, like you embrace that. Our mom spent so much time like trying to like balance that out. It's like, no, like I want nothing to do with you. Here, you want your demon side so bad, because I think that's probably what pisses her off more. It's like you rather embrace that demon side who doesn't want you, but for Abigail, it's also the witch side of things doesn't want her either. So it's like, who do I have to turn to but myself? But Mel is suggesting that basically her mind is trying to tell her something, and maybe it's time you listen. And I guess it's trying to tell her, like, don't get so consumed with power. Like her lust and need for power is basically her undoing, because her power is either getting so out of control it's trying to kill her, or it's just because like her demon side is trying to kill that other side of her witch side. But I think it's more so like, yeah, like you shouldn't have done this. Like your subconscious is trying to tell you to be more in tune, I guess, with your witch side, and don't kind of submit and give in and lust after the power of your demon side. Potentially, I don't know. I thought that was an interesting development. But on the relationship side of things, Ruby and Mel do mend fences. It's like, I don't want Abby, but it's like seeing you with Muffin Girl, it made me a little insecure, and it's like, yeah. But obviously for Ruby, it's like, yeah, seeing you with the demon spawn Abigail, I just love that phrasing, demon spawn. It's like, made me a little, the same. So it's like, I want you and I want you, so it's like, but honestly, these muffins are pretty good. But, it's just like, and I like that being like a little thing too. Like, even though with the allergy, it does create this little magical spark. We saw it with Harry and Macy. But I think it's actually kind of a cute representation of like, yeah, we can't get close to each other, but we can surge this energy between us. It's like the literal manifestation of the spark between them. So I'm glad things worked out on that front. Granted, doesn't mean they still can't turn down the Abigail Mel route, because I could definitely see Abigail struggling with things going forward and wanting Mel's help. Maybe making amends with her sister on that front, maybe not, or maybe making amends with. Well, I don't know if she talked about if her mom's still alive or not. Obviously, maybe that plays on some part of why her sister has resentment. Like maybe it's like, oh, you weren't there when mom died or something like that. You were so quick to abandon your witch side, but it's like, once again, the witch side kind of abandoned her to a certain extent. But maybe they were a lot more open to it, but she wanted to kind of give in more to her demon side, because on some level, much like Parker trying to impress your dad, Alistair, maybe some level of that. Nevertheless, I just think that's kind of interesting. Then on the Macy side of things, obviously, early on, Maggie was following that Elliot dude, which I love that came back. I was like, okay, so we are going to do a bit more with this. But he was there when that creature came out, that rift in the air. And so, obviously, Macy and Harry go investigate. And that leads to some interesting developments, obviously, like him still thinking this is alien stuff. So it's like, oh, yeah, I mean, I guess it's better, because if he's just alien stuff, people aren't going to believe him anyway. I mean, if he brought up it being magical, they wouldn't believe him anyway. But it's like, you'd rather him stay on the alien side of things than magic. But it turns out he has an orb, because they were like, how? Because at first they were thinking he must be magical, that maybe he's summoning these things, controlling them like golems, but it turns out he's not magical at all. But he does have a magical orb, and it's like, okay, like, because when Macy tried to touch it, electricity, because, the magic allergy, so it's like, what is this thing? So they're trying to study it and figure it out after they stole it from Elliot. But Harry accidentally uses it to kind of find answers, because for him, he's making kind of a wish, which even later on, he's like, yeah, from now on, I should know better I should have actually known better not to make wishes while having a magical artifact at my fingertips. But essentially, it gives him insight to a lot of stuff that basically starts connecting a lot of dots. Like by the time Macy comes back to him, it's like, oh, he's kind of going in like almost conspiracy mode, but like seeming a little crazy, but it basically unlocked his mind, and he's starting to connect the dots about the symbols and the strokes of the symbols, that basically he starts quantifying like things, numbers. It's a whole bunch of a lot of words and stuff. Let's just leave it at that. But obviously he becomes obsessed with the orb. It's like, no, I'll hold on to this. It's mine. You don't touch another man's orb. That's a whole thing. But obviously Macy's kind of worried about the way Harry's acting, so she goes to check on Elliot. And it turns out Elliot became blind from this thing. It's like, because it basically unlocks the third eye, and it gives you this great and powerful insight, but it comes with the backlash of it steals your vision. But it also it's like a drug. You become obsessed with it. What was interesting, though, is that Elliot said that someone was a fan of his is actually pinpointing him towards this thing, and he ended up finding it, and that's how he was actually able to eventually find like where that sky had opened up. So I'm curious, in the long run, it's the person who pointed him in that right direction that, like, they didn't make a point of it, but it is a little thing of like, hey, maybe it is just a fan, but part of me wonders, could that have been someone setting something in motion potentially? I don't know. But basically, Elliot had kind of pieced a lot of stuff together on his own. Once again, he's coming at this from the perspective of aliens, but it's like, hey, if you love this friend of yours, you want to get this orb away from him as quickly as possible. You know, the more you use it, the more it degenerates you and it takes away from you. And sadly, we see that Elliot dies. So it's like, oh, I'm kind of sad that, because I thought maybe they'd be able to save him, but also that it would create, you know, there could be more to this. Like, because I was about to say, like, him being the conspirator about this being alien stuff could start dabbling in the human world, finding out more about aliens, in the sense of, like, obviously we have the faction last season / part of this season, you know, dealing with the aftermath of that. But I was also curious if, you know, him continuing could be a plot point. It still could be, because it could be a thing of, oh, he's dead now. All the conspiracy people could be like, oh, like someone else picks it up, like, oh, we gotta continue down this route, because it might be a thing of, oh, he died, like was getting too close, and that might kind of jumpstart like conspiracy theorists that maybe that will turn into a bigger plot point continuing forward, or maybe not. Maybe it sadly dies with Elliot. I'm interested to see whether they pull any more threads from that situation or not. But what we did get some interesting insight is that from, you know, it was nice that Macy was able to pull Harry back really quickly, I should say. Because for him, he's wanting to solve a lot of stuff. Because a worry that's been going through Harry's head so much was like, hey, he is older. I even love they make that jab about it. Which I think it's kind of mean, too, because the actor who plays Harry is older than the actress who plays Macy. So there is a bit of an age difference. I want to say the actress who plays Macy's in her late 20s. She might be early 30s, but I want to say she was in her late 20s, if I'm not mistaken. Like I said, it could be. And I think the actor who plays Harry's like, maybe, I want to say he's in his 40s. So, like, you know, it is kind of it's a little mean to throw that out there. But also the fact is just naturally he's older, having been alive so long because of being a white lighter. So initially, you know, but then Jordan brought something up that Harry had never considered before. Like, right, I'm an old man by my own standards, but I'm also going to live forever because I'm never going to age. Macy will. And so for him, it wasn't just about figuring out this problem. It was about figuring out that. It's about figuring out everything, like not only the monsters and the symbols and the allergy, but also their situation. Because for him, it's like she's eventually going to grow old and he's going to lose her. So for him, you know, and even Macy being like, yes, there's a lot of problems on our table right now, but you know, we will solve them. Maybe not yet, but eventually we will, you know, and even us, you know, and it's like, you know, what's an anagram for solve? Loves. And it's like, you know, that's what we have, you know, let that kind of be our focus. Like, you know, let that be what we have for today. And, you know, and for, you know, tomorrow's problem, and was able to get Harry to let go. And it's like, I think, because that kind of ends up happening in the original series, if I remember correctly. Like, obviously, well, it's more so because he eventually becomes human. I think everyone's significant other eventually becomes human. Because even, like, the Cupid that Phoebe ends up with ended up becoming human at the end, if I remember correctly. So everyone kind of gets human at the end. So Harry, whether it's... there's got to be some circumstances that allows him to maintain his... I think at the end of it all, it's going to be him giving up his white lighter powers. Now, whether it's going to be a permanent thing or whether it's going to be a temporary thing of like, oh, I'm able to give them up, and he kind of enjoys being human, but sadly, because he's human, he can't help the charm ones like he wants to. So I'm figuring there might be kind of a storyline beat along those lines, or maybe it's just going to be, hey, there's potentially a route of giving up your powers, but the question is, do you want to or not? And it's like, to be with Macy, especially with this magic allergy being a thing, that could be a temporary, like, hey, this worked out. Now, whether it's he chooses to do that, or whether it's an accidental situation that causes him to lose his white lighter powers for a little bit, we'll ultimately have to wait and see. But what I thought was really interesting is when, what Macy ended up saying, that kind of piecing a lot of stuff together, that isn't just nonsense that, you know, Harry pieced together while he was using the orb, that basically a lot of the stuff that he kind of unlocked kind of connected to some theories of there being a fifth dimension. And along with what Harry was saying, he's like, oh, I've got to find a tomb or a prison or something. It makes her realize these are like the baddest of baddies, to the point that they get their own separate, like, obviously there was already like a prison set up in the first season where people got put at. So for these to get their own dimension, their own prison set in a magical Alcatraz, as Macy states it, shows you how bad these things are, because they're very powerful monsters that are one of a kind. So it's interesting. What I thought was really fascinating is that, the cause of this was obviously them using the source's power to restore magic, to the tree and everything. And it's like, their phrasing of it I thought was interesting. We basically blew the doors off the prison. I figured we all knew there was a correlation, but I think it's so interesting to know that I guess it's because when they used the source's power, it's just so much damn magic that it like basically jump-started the system, but it kind of quickly overloaded the system. And basically because of that, the prison doors either flew open or at least overloaded the security system, and they were able to slip out. And it's like, we have no idea how many monsters would have escaped this so-called prison. We got one on film, but who knows, like simultaneously across the world, there could have been a multitude that ended up getting released all at once. So, and that's the question, did the cell doors close back? I mean, because my thought process was maybe this is all leading up to resurrecting the source as itself. Still could possibly be a thing, but I think there's probably going to be like one particular overall baddie that was locked away in this prison that's going to be potentially the main antagonist. We'll have to wait and see, but I thought that was such an interesting development to the story. So, and then on the other side of things is things with Maggie. Obviously, she's trying to get her clinic started, for her for that position that she's working for. And obviously Jordan comes over and it's like, oh yeah, so all these names are fake, like huge ass Anita Bath. It's like, oh, you were being messed with. Her immediate thought is, it's that bastard Antonio, I'm gonna make him pay. And she uses her magic to like mess with him, and it's like, oh, you got it back. You can dish it out, but you can't take it. Oh, he wasn't the one responsible, because it's basically like a fraternity or something prank, and it's like, oh. So she kind of sought vengeance for no reason, so that kind of hit a bummer for her, like, oh, I guess Antonio's not as much of a dick as I think he is. But then you have Jordan's side of things, where Jordan's trying, it's like, yeah, because he said, like, last year kicked our asses, we're going to kick this year's asses. And like Maggie was like, hell yeah. So he's going to work at the firm, because basically if he can write his ticket with this internship and like getting himself to be in a position where he can kind of do what he wants to do, like, it opens up many doors. Interestingly enough, the guy he's interning for, it's like, hey, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, Dr. Cerberus, also, if I'm not mistaken, he was in Smallville as well. Yeah, he was. What's also interesting too, he was also on the 100, so like obviously got a deep like WB slash, because I want to say he was also in Man of Steel, if I'm not mistaken. I could be mistaken, but I think he was in Man of Steel as well. So it's definitely got a deep rooted WB property connection slash the CW connection as well. So I just think that's interesting. But Jordan ends up finding out the case they're working on isn't like, oh, we're not the good guys in this situation. We're defending this big company, which, oh man, that's awesome and everything, great job. But it meant like punishing a woman that got paralyzed because of this particular company. And it's like, oh, we're defending them. He ended up helping find information that would screw over her position. And it makes him feel bad because, both of them ended up doing stuff that wasn't very them, and it's like, we got so caught up in our own ambitions of what we wanted, we kind of had blinders on. So it's a situation of, hey, we need to it's good to have our ambitions and dreams and everything, but we got to make sure we go about handling things this way so that we don't compromise who we are. But we also got a little insight into the Jordan and Maggie thing, because initially my thought is like, oh, the last time we saw Jordan and Maggie is before they jump started the the tree that you're thinking like, oh, Maggie's thinking she's gonna have to sacrifice herself. So the way they were making it seem like that might have been the last time. At least that's what, maybe that was my misunderstanding, thinking that was the last interaction between the two. And she was like, oh, things kind of we were getting close. And she thought like, oh, I thought that's what she was talking about. Like I had to pull away. Apparently they tried to get close. And that's when they found out about the magic allergy. It's like, crap, it isn't just to my sister or Harry. It's to anything magic related, including the curse that Jordan has. So she ends up getting zapped, and that kind of put a kibosh on that. But for Maggie, it's like, obviously there's a feelings between her and Jordan, but for her, she wants this to be a year about her own dreams, her ambitions. She's got to work on her, because I think before now there was a lot of like relationship stuff, obviously the complicated stuff between her and Jordan, obviously the complicated Parker stuff. So it's just been a lot of that. So I think I just need to take this year to work on me and figure me out. Obviously, she sits down with Antonio. They kind of bridge the gap. She's like, yeah, you're my... He's like, why'd you think it was me? She's like, because you're my nemesis. He's like, I'm your nemesis. No, you're my nemesis. You know, and it's like, oh, I thought that was kind of sweet. And it's also like, oh, but you talk over me. She's like, right. He's like, right. I come from a family of 3 brothers, which get to that in a second. And it's like, you know, if you don't speak loud, you're not heard. So he apologizes. And it's like, you know, we deal with our own, like, you know... essentially our own insecurities, and you know, we're our own worst enemies, so we don't need to be each other's, because we already have enough like negative voices in our head, you know, kind of tearing us down. We don't need to tear each other down. So I was like, hey, you know, no matter who gets this position, you know, it'll be rightfully deserved. So, and as they clink beers, then immediately she has a vision of them having sex, and just finish having sex, and you're like, oh boy, that's going to complicate the you and Jordan thing. It's like, ooh, that's... Ugh. And she's just like... It's moments like that, you're like, yay, magic. It just complicates and ruins things to a certain extent. So it's like, that's going to be something she's going to actively be trying to fight, especially after she made that point to Jordan, like, there can't really be a them because she wants to work on her, but now finding out, like, oh, me and Antonio kind of hook up. Now, what really caught my attention was the line, I come from a family of 3 boys. I'm like, okay, 3 boys, 3 sisters. These 3 sisters end up being the charm ones, because I'm still thinking about there's that prophecy or warning that Jordan got last season, and I'm like, we still haven't seen that really come to a head. Not less technically it did. I mean, I think because part of it was about the Conqueror and stuff like that, so that kind of came true and stuff, but I thought it was like, it was saying there were like other, like there was other parts to it that were talking kind of about like 3 people, and so I'm wondering, is it going to be Antonio? Granted, when they clinked beers, I feel like there would have been a little bit of a magical shock if there was something there. Like, maybe it's a thing of they're not magical now, but eventually they will be, or maybe it's just a situation that Maggie was so caught up in the vision she didn't notice it, because it is a proximity thing, so even them clinking beers would have been enough to activate the allergy, I think. I mean, I don't know. Like, yeah, because obviously everyone keeps a good enough distance generally, so, but even in that close proximity, you think it still would have activated. So that's probably wrong, but it sent me in conspiracy mode, like, oh, 3 brothers. Could they be like the literal polar opposites to the charm ones? That's what I was kind of wondering in that regard. Once again, I'm probably reading too much into it, but I'm going to keep an eye on that. I'm going to keep that in the back of my mind for now about Antonio and his potential 2 other brothers and what that might mean. Maybe it was just a thing of like, hey, like he has 2 siblings, much like Maggie does, and it's just supposed to bring like similarities between them, and like obviously like who they are personality wise got to gel together well. So maybe that's all the purpose of it was. But like I said, for now I'll keep my conspiracy hat on about that. So we'll see whether anything becomes of that, and like I said, whether or not I'm reading too much into it. But a lot of really interesting developments. I'm curious to see where everything ends up going from here, where the next episode ends up taking us. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.